So welcome everybody. Very excited to be here. As you know, David Clutterbuck was unable to make it. He had some emergency happen. And so we invited Peter, and Peter was very gracious to accept. And the thing about Peter is just last, I want to say Thursday, he accepted our invitation to be our keynote at our Coaching Supervision Conference next year. So I believe in energy fields, and I believe these all happened for a reason, and that's why he's here. And he couldn't say no because the universe said, say yes. So very excited to have Peter here. Peter is a coach and a coach supervisor, and I met Peter at Oxford Brookes in May and got to know him a little bit. And he teaches at the Oxford Brookes, in the Oxford Brookes Coaching Supervision Program, as well as the Advanced Supervision Program. And he's written numerous books and articles, mainly with Tatiana Bakarova, right? Is that correct? You're on mute, probably.
Peter, you're on mute, so we are not hearing you. Okay.
Yes, that's
that's right.
Yes, to both. Mostly in the supervision area, mostly with Tatiana. Although I have other interests that overlap less with Tatiana's. And yes, I was on mute. Correct.
Yes. All right. And he. Anything else I need to say about you, other than let's give you lots of space and time here? I'm curious to hear what you're talking about.
Think so. No, that's absolutely fine.
All right, so let's do a round then. If you could introduce yourself, please, and just mention geographically where you're located. That would be helpful for Peter. And then, Peter, it'll be all yours.
Oh, okay.
I'm Pat Marham in Tucson, Arizona, where the cactus are like this.
Terry Hildebrand from Denver, Colorado.
Hi, Terry.
Mary Jo Asmus from Southwest Michigan.
Mary Jo, you didn't appear. You didn't speak for long enough, and so I didn't get to see your picture.
Can you see me now? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. I can see Michael Frisch's phone.
Yeah, Peter, if you choose the speaker's view, the gallery view in the top of the screen, you have a choice between speaker's view and gallery view. So if you have in gallery view, you can see everybody who's in the call at the same time.
Oh, great. Got it.
You see that? Can you see that in the top?
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm Mary Jo Asmus, and I'm from Southwest Michigan.
Hello, I found you now. Thank you.
Lynn DeLay, and I'm from Williamstown, Massachusetts, which is not Boston, the other end of the state.
Right.
I'm Dee Dee Osborne in Colorado, up in the mountains, not too far from Terry.
Hey, I'm Matt Chapman, and I'm in the Santa Cruz, California area.
Hi, Matt.
Mike Frisch, I'm in upstate New York. I don't know, maybe I inadvertently turned off my video. I'll see if I can turn it back on.
We can hear you very well, Mike.
Good. Thanks.
Laurie Hillis in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and Victoria, BC, where I am right now, just down the street from Lily.
Right. Hi.
Hi, Peter.
I've actually been to Victoria. I think that might be the first town that's been mentioned that I've actually been to.
We'll see you in April.
This is Poyi Dorian. I'm joining from Columbus, Ohio.
Oh, hello. Hi. Mike, you've appeared, by the way.
Oh, great. Thank you. I got the buttons. A little new at this.
This is Gilda. I'm from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil.
Hello, Gilda.
Hi, Jason Sackett from Los Angeles, California.
Hi, Jason.
Michelle Roy from Calgary, Alberta.
Michelle.
I think most people introduce themselves. Scott just is joining us. Hi, Scott. We are just introducing each other from where our name and where we are from.
It's Scott Richardson from Victoria, Canada. We're supposed to do that, I think, Lily and Laurie.
It's amazing. We're the majority here.
You are. Make everybody introduce. Michael, I don't know if you introduce yourself, but Peter already know you, but I don't know if everybody knows you here.
Hi, Damien. Hi, Lily. Yeah, it's Michael from Montreal, and I'm trying to figure out if you guys can see me. You
Yes.
can? Okay, and you can hear me? Good? Okay, great. Super. So I'm from Montreal, and pleased to be here. Hello, Peter. Hello, Lily, and hello, Damien. And everybody else.
Michael, lovely to see you again.
Good to see you.
Yes, I think that now, Peter, everybody introduced.
Okay. So how long do you want to work on? And just those who've missed the background, I've parachuted into your meeting at short notice, last minute. So I'm very keen to do something of value. But I had when Damien and Lily contacted me, I had something of a full schedule already. So I've not been able to design or tune something specifically, but I'm trusting that Damien and Lily know me well enough that there will be a fit. So I've got some thoughts about some work that Tatiana and I have been looking at recently, which I think might be it'd be interesting to see how it works with people, and because maybe we could use it for the conference too. So how long do we have, Damien?
So we have 1 hour, 50 minutes from now, and in your presentation, Peter, you were humble. Peter is one of the pioneers of coaching supervision in the UK and in the world. So you have been involved in coaching supervision for a long time, other than reading a few books and articles. So it would be great to hear from you in terms of what do you see as the latest development on coaching supervision, and then leave it for an open conversation. So maybe you want to listen for 10, 15 minutes, and then we have, as you see, people from all over the world, mainly the Americas. There is another network of the coaching supervisors in Europe, and it's open for everybody, but mainly Europe, and this is mainly people from Americas. So we can just have a conversation, and people ask questions and share perspectives.
Okay, so I'll give a little bit of background then. I come from an organizational background. I actually started off in IT and moved into HR, and then was kind of interested in how change happens in organizations, and became very interested in the conversations in the corridor and how those happen. So, and that's what kind of brought me to the coaching field. And I found the Oxford Brookes MA in Coaching Mentoring Practice in 2001. I finished the MA program in 2004, by which time they'd offered me a job, which is great. And I left my previous organizational role, which by that time was in HR. So during that time, while I've been at Oxford Brookes, I've been both developing my practice and developing my interests, and particularly research interests. As well as the supervision course, I teach on the MA program now, particularly the practice modules, because I work part-time at Oxford Brookes and also practice independently, both in coaching and supervision. So I'm very interested in that crossover between practice and academia. As an academic, I kind of really value practice, and as a practitioner, I really value theory and academia and the formalization of knowledge. So that's the kind of drift. Tatiana set up a postgraduate certificate in coaching supervision about 7 or 8 years ago that was articulated with our MA program. So people could do the postgraduate certificate in supervision and then go on and do the other modules and come out with an MA. It was kind of half of it was more or less the same as the MA in coaching mentoring practice. What we found was that not so many people wanted to structure their learning in that way. So we redeveloped that, and that I think is of interest to the conversation. we redeveloped that into something that people could kind of take in a more modular way. Either you could just attend, you could attend to do some further work and demonstrate your learning, you could attend, demonstrate your learning and develop your practice further, and then articulate your practice in various ways, so that it was more of a kind of people could fine tune it to how they wanted to learn. So this is where I met Damien recently and Michael. Damien knows Tatiana for longer. Bumped into Lily, of course, at our conference, where I had a fascinating day listening to Guy Claxton. Lily, I remember, was slightly sleepy on that occasion, and then suddenly a completely different Lily turned up the next day, and I suddenly discovered what her thoughts were about things. So I guess that's what I'm looking forward to in April, although I'm traveling in the right direction, I think. So I should be okay. So that's the kind of background. Now, Tatiana and I, a piece of work that I think you might be interested in, and you can kind of nod, wave, look in horror, or whatever is appropriate to the suggestion. We've done a couple of pieces of writing recently. One was all our colleagues talking about the philosophy, our philosophy of education behind the MA program, and some of that comes out also in the coaching supervision, and thinking not just about education, but thinking about how people develop. And I guess that's where my thinking was for today: is how do people develop, and what do they develop in order to become coach supervisors, which I think is complex. So we've done a piece of work there amongst ourselves and all our colleagues across our International Centre for Coaching Mentoring Studies. But also we've just, one of the other participants in our course, Hetty Einzig, asked us to write a short piece for the Association for Coaching. And when we were approaching that, we were thinking, how should we go about it? And I suggested we just ask each other questions, the kind of questions that come up on our courses. So the kind of things that people seem to be curious about. And we asked each other those questions and developed a dialogue. And actually it was quite interesting because I discovered that I had positions and thoughts about it that I didn't realize I had. And also the way that Tatiana responded to my questions developed my thoughts even further. So one thing I kind of thought of is that we could just talk around those questions, and it'd be interesting to see what you guys make of that too. Would you prefer to work in this way? I mean, I have those questions on a PowerPoint, and I could share my screen if you want me to, or I can just kind of, what I was thinking was just, I can just kind of put these questions to you and see what people think. Now I've asked you two things, to both of which the answer is yes or no, and I see lots of nodding heads, and I realize it was a really bad way to structure the question, because everybody has the opportunity to nod and they might be asking different. So the way I'll put it then is nod enthusiastically if you would like the PowerPoint in front of you. Okay, now stop. And now nod enthusiastically if you would not like, if you would just like everybody's faces and...
It seems that you have half and half. So Peter, why don't you do both? Why don't you just show them for a little while so people get to see the visual people, and then you get in and we get to have a conversation. How does it sound?
You're a genius. Okay. I'm sure earlier on there was a thing that said share screen, and I don't know where it's gone.
It's it's a green box down in the bottom of the screen. It's a green.
Since I went to this view that you told me to go to, I no longer have green boxes.
Okay, so go back if you want to gallery view or speakers view, or make the screen smaller. Like if you shrink the screen, you'll be able to see it.
None of those things are happening.
The other possibility, I don't know how many questions are there, just you type it in the chat room so people can read them next to the...
To everyone, okay, I've got that there. I did have it because I tried it earlier.
Okay, So try one more time. Like, do you want to try to? Do you have like a way to make the screen smaller and bigger? So when you do that,
yeah, nothing is. But normally I can just grab the corner, but that's not happening.
Do you have a band at the very bottom of the screen with the camera icon and the microphone icon? It's down there.
Yeah, that was there until I went to this view where I can see everybody, and then that band went. Okay, well, I'm learning something about Zoom.
It sounds like your screen is showing too much for the size of your screen of your laptop. So if you find that corner, Peter, and drag it in, you'll see the bottom. I find if you take your icon down towards the bottom, it'll flash up for you.
Yeah, instead of seeing everybody, you need to be on speaker view, Peter.
Yeah, it's getting that option back.
It's that little. It's in the top right, just below the X, in the black part of your screen.
I got it. Okay, I've got that panel back.
Great.
Okay, so share screen is now an option.
so you have to be careful with what you're sharing because they give you different options what you're going to be sharing. So you want to share the PowerPoint and not something else from your screen.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, there you go. There's my nephew's wedding photos, as predicted. Okay. So what we thought about it was I had a running book a while ago called "What do I talk about when I talk about running?" and I was inspired by that name. What do we talk about when we talk about supervision? Just a little bit about our work. Mine and Tatiana's. The main piece of work was that with David Clutterbuck, we edited this book, Coaching, Mentoring, Supervision, Theory and Practice. My own work, I've got a chapter of physicality on the Sage Handbook of Coaching. The reason I mention this is that as an academic, citations are my currency. So rather than likes on Facebook, if anybody kind of chooses to cite my chapters, then I'm always grateful. A chapter on developmental coaching in the Complete Handbook of Coaching, which is Sage, and I had a chapter called Does It Matter What the Coach Thinks, which is about development as a coach in philosophy and practice of coaching. So some questions. This was Tatiana's first question to me. What do experienced coaches need to know and do over and above their knowledge and skills as coaches in order to become coaching supervisors? I thought, that's it. Great. Thank you, Tatiana. Straight in at the deep end. I'm not sure I can answer that one. This is the big question that we often get on courses. Can I just check, is everybody seeing this and is everybody still hearing me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. So what we realized, well, I realized very quickly, was we had to go a little way round the houses to get to this. So we asked some other questions, and so I'd like to kind of hear if other people have views on this from their own experience. So I asked Tatiana to ask me her second question because the first one was too difficult. In what way can learning to supervise enhance your coaching practice? Now, my impression is that everybody has done some courses or development in supervision. And I think this is an interesting question that actually helps us get to this real nub of, so what's different about coaching supervision? One or two of the things that I've come across is where people on courses, when we had the postgraduate certificate, I met a couple of people who'd turned up for the MA in coaching, and they found that their experience meant that they looked at the syllabus and thought they weren't going to develop very far. And I talked to them and suggested that they try out the supervision course. Now, they didn't want to be supervisors, but when they finished the postgraduate certificate in supervision, they said that's been really helpful for our practice. We really start to see our coaching practice with new dimensions, a new perspective. So, and I think that as a supervisor, as a supervision practitioner myself, I found that. I wondered what other people had experienced. Does that ring true for people?
Well, this is Pat. If you're waiting for an answer, I can give you my answer.
Yeah, sure. That's great. No, that was an invitation to participate.
Okay. One of the things I realized from supervision when I went through training 9 years ago is how I knew the words. I knew all the words, but I didn't get the concept until I'd actually had an experience of it, which felt like an entirely different medium. It felt as different from coaching as water does from air, sort of. So it gave me more dimension, a second dimension from which to look at my coaching and my coaching practice.
So what do you remember what impact you felt that had on your practice? What changed in your coaching practice when you did that?
It really did feel like an entirely different medium. And because of that, it opened up what I felt I could do in coaching more than I had understood before. It gave me I've always been sort of a meta thinker, but it gave me more dimension to the meta. I would say more 360 to the meta. It actually was like a different dimension.
Great, thank you. So does anybody else, we'll perhaps take a couple of views on this and then move on to the next question and see if people have.
This is John, and I apologize for being a few minutes late, but if everyone can hear me, I want to acknowledge that I use these principles of coaching supervision in a class I teach at NYU on coaching, theory and foundations of coaching and coaching practice. And sometimes I find it much easier to talk about, for example, the 7 lenses or the 7-eyed model as a way to distinguish different components of what coaches are doing, because I realize as new and aspiring coaches, these students just see coaching as a massive blob of something and don't easily understand that it's made up of various components, technique and skill and craft and choices that coaches make. And maybe that's the best way for me to answer this, is to say it helps me to explain to students where coaches are constantly and why coaches are constantly making choices in the course of sessions and in the course of coaching conversations. And so the whole supervision preparation has made that much easier, as we just heard. A better lexicon, a better vocabulary to use to make coaching clearer. I'm finished.
Thank you. That makes sense to me. I can kind of follow that. That in supervision we start to concern ourselves with these multidimensional perspectives, and therefore we then start to see that in practice and see that as an opportunity for other people's practice as well. Okay, so let's move on and see if people have got questions. Views on a few more questions. So a question that I asked Tatiana was, do we know what makes a difference in supervision? Do we know what it is in what we do as supervisors that is going to create impact, that's going to create change, or whatever we think supervision is for? Does anybody have a feel for that? Because it's interesting that we have a syllabus for learning, though Damien and Michael might attest to the fact that the syllabus, our syllabus, is not particularly kind of concrete points of learning, but more of a kind of process. So, but we tend to think of there being things that we should learn. But what do we know about what makes a difference? I wonder if anybody has any feelings about what is it I must do as a supervisor or must know as a supervisor in order for my supervision to have impact?
Mary Jo, and I have some thoughts on that in regards to, in particular, the reflective practice.
Right.
I believe that that's making a huge difference with the people that I'm supervising, because they tell me it is, and they tell me that they haven't had a safe place to discuss these sorts of things. Many of them are in peer coaching groups, and those tend to be a little different and maybe just a little more surface than the supervision.
Mm-hmm.
So that reflective practice and the coach being present and making it safe to dive a little deeper, I think is really important.
Mm. Yes, I completely agree with that. I think that feels like my experience. Of course, the question then pops up, thinking, okay, that sounds like great coaching. So, did we just not know that before we started thinking about supervision, or does it change how we coach, or is it a different thing? But we'll come back to that. So, anybody else have any thoughts on the same question?
This is Jason. I do. I was thinking along the same lines as Mary Jo, which was that it's a way to challenge coaches in a supportive and non-judgmental role. And I think that the role itself is one of the main distinctions. In other words, the role of the supervisor is distinct from the coach in that the purpose is to challenge the coach.
Mm-hmm.
And that role is what makes it safe, and it also makes it safe for the supervisor to be challenging, to contract, to to prompt the coach to reflect more and ask more from their practice.
Mm-hmm. So just to develop that further, you said it's something about the role of the supervisor. I just want to kind of go a little bit further in the differentiation there. There seemed to be a differentiation in your mind about what might be different from a coaching relationship, but I'm not sure that was explicit. Do you have more thoughts about that?
Well, I think the difference is that in a coaching relationship, it's the process is very goal oriented.
Right.
There is some insight orientation, but ultimately it's connected to some practical goal, whereas in supervision, right, it's just insight oriented and supportive of the coach's reflective process.
Right.
There's no sort of action plan necessarily.
Okay. So it's that insight. The insight is the goal.
Right, and it's a role that is specific to coaches.
Mm-hmm.
The supervisor doesn't provide this role to anyone but a coach.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a coach provides the coach's role to anyone, potentially.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jason.
Mm-hmm.
So does anybody else want to pick up on that, or I can go on to the next?
One thing, this is Michelle, is actually I'm involved in a research project where the reflective process that happens in supervision is actually being brought to executives. So I'm not sure about supervision, the role of supervision being exclusively for the coach.
Right.
I don't think I agree with that one. And I have some other points, but I'm going to wait. I want to see all your questions first, Peter.
There aren't many of them. And I think this is the opportunity with these questions.
Okay.
That we start to kind of mold something. And I'm very interested in what you just said there about what if you bring that same quality to an executive, i.e. to a coaching client. And what strikes me about that is that when we compare supervision with coaching, we might be comparing different supervisions with different coachings. So, as you say, I mean, I think my particular style of coaching, I mean, I mentioned my chapter on developmental coaching, which I wrote with Elaine Cox, and I would say that the crux of that approach for me, my approach, and which I would describe as developmental, is that I see the problem solving that coaching clients present with as a developmental problem, rather than a problem to be solved. I think it's they will be able to solve it if they can see the situation from a different place, and therefore I focus my coaching work on development. So my particular practice might be a lot closer to that, insight being the outcome of coaching than somebody else's practice, which is obviously equally legitimate, which might have a stronger focus on goals and the mechanism of goals and the psychology of goal processes. So the thing that strikes me about those answers there that you've given is that the guys between you have given is there will be different gaps between different people's coachings and different people's supervisions.
Yeah, which if I can build on what you're saying, I'm really appreciating the way that you're approaching our comments. It's expanding my way of thinking about it. So I appreciate that. And this idea of different ways of coaching and different ways of supervision and coming at it differently, because that sort of speaks to my second point that I wanted to make, is that coaching, the way coaching is taught, I don't think is terribly consistent. The baseline of it. The baseline, of course, there's different models, and I'm a mentor coach, so I work with people who have just come out of programs, and from various colleges, universities, independent coaching schools, and I think there's something there. There's some juice there for me around there's not a baseline of coaching approach, like very basic, So what am I saying there? I'm saying that, people are experiencing things in supervision which they could be experiencing in coaching. But the skill and development isn't there to provide that. And I think that is part of the problem of us attracting, getting supervision onto the marketplace. Because it's not a clear, and I think part of that not having a clear differentiation part of it is, not the only part of it, but part of it is that baseline of coaching skills and coaching approach. Basic foundational learning approach and understanding of coaching isn't there across the board. And that's just one perspective, I realize, but I am seeing that. And so that I do believe that what happens in supervision can happen in coaching as well. Yeah. And the other point, am I saying too much? I got one other small point is...
it's fine by me. The less I talk, the happier I am.
Okay. And that is, I think I lost it. So maybe it wasn't supposed to happen right now. It will come back, I think. So I'll stop.
So let me understand this thing about the baseline skills in coaching. You're saying if there was a more sophisticated baseline of coaching skills, then the two activities might overlap more, that there might be more of what happens in supervision happening in coaching. Was that your position?
Yeah. Even though, obviously I understand that supervision is the focus is different, right? It's than coaching. It can be more reflective. It can be more insightful, less goal-oriented. I mean, those things that were said earlier can be true. Yeah, I think I can give you an example. Contracting is one of the main things I talk about is a mentor coach.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not consistently taught across the universities and schools and the programs I've been mentoring to.
Right.
And that's a baseline. I would say that's one of the baselines of coaching. And that's something that is talked about. We really spend some time in supervision. That's often something that comes as a topic to supervision.
Yeah.
With clients, with coaches. With coaching clients that are coaches, and so I guess that's a small example, Peter. But I don't want to take over the whole mic here. I just wanted to make that point because I think it's an important one. I do. I think it is important, especially when it comes to all of us as supervisor wanting to get supervision into the marketplace.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I guess, a couple of things come out for me in what you're saying. One is that if that baseline is relatively low, then also there might be quite a low level of understanding of what supervision can add to people's practice. Because if somebody's been taught, do it like this, no, do it more like I do it, and that kind of process of training, then the idea of reflective practice, self-insight, self-development is not going to be embedded in that learning process. So where some other processes of coaches developing towards their practice might emphasize those things, and so they might go, well, actually it makes absolute perfect sense that I would use a supervisor because I finished this program, but I can carry on learning in that way. That's a fantastic thing. So that might be if there's a kind of strong predominance of very kind of explicit skills and routines based learning about coaching, then there may be fairly low levels of sensitivity to what supervision can add in some domains, I guess, because there's going to be a range, of course.
I'm not sure.
But it's so in a way they become closer, but it becomes more meaningful to use supervision. So what do we know makes a difference in supervision? I guess you're also describing that those qualities of self-awareness, self-insight, self-development, reflexivity, reflective learning are all perhaps, well, we're saying at the same time they're more important for the supervisor, but they should also be more important for the coach. So I don't know whether that's a difference or not. Does anybody else have any further thoughts on that? Because I think people do have very different experiences of how they both came to coaching and how they came to supervision, which gives us different reflections. And if we can achieve anything in this session, what would be nice is sharing those experiences to hear difference.
This is Mike Frisch speaking. Just to pick up on the comments that were just made, I think the activity in supervision varies greatly based on the experience level of the coach. And like the mentor coach I forgot who was just speaking, but most of my supervision is connected with the training we do in a certificate program for coaches. And that tends to be some blocking and tackling supervision about, as was mentioned, contracting, dealing with sponsors, finding your way through to what a development plan, feedback, all kinds of kind of basic stuff, which to my mind is fine. And then as people get more experience, then you can get into more of what they're bringing to it and use of self and other kinds of more advanced topics where their own personal self-reflection and self-awareness becomes really the main focus. So I think that where the coach is in their own developmental process really affects what gets covered in supervision.
And Peter Hawkins' model is of the coach's level of development. I think is very useful to bear in mind in that respect. It's something that we talk about on our program when people are thinking about their own development. So I think you've got there's 4 levels. I'm now doing it from memory, which is an interesting test. So your people. Well, I'm not sure I can get Hawkins' model correct off the top of my head, but I know that when students are first developing, their first question is, "How should I have done this? What's the technique I should have used?" And then they move on to, "Am I delivering benefit? Am I developing service?" Then they can move on to, "How can I develop as a person in order to develop service better?" And then then we start to have conversations about the system as a whole. So that seems to reflect what you were saying there about, and as supervisors, of course, we need to be constantly flexible to add value in whichever space that person happens to be in at the time. And I always say to students, this isn't a kind of a discrete developmental process. I will find myself on particular topics at stage 1 on days, and can simultaneously be in stage 4 on some other topic. But we tend to move backwards and forwards according to our emotional state and our level of experience with particular topics. Or, when things press our buttons, I mean, we can always be, when something tweaks our existing psyche, we can be absolutely as infantile as anybody else on the planet. When we're triggered in those ways, and I think that's one of the sensitivities about personal development. I'd love coaches to all have that sensitivity, but certainly in supervision, to be able to work with those with our client, the coach's tweaks, and those tweaks for ourselves simultaneously, recognizing when we can use that as information, as you say, use of self, Mike, because that can highlight the parallel process, is a level of sophistication that seems to be different from a problem-solving approach. Mike, I've noticed that you seem to be up most of the time as the active speaker, even when you're not speaking. So I don't know if there's something about your mic that's maybe activating maybe it's rubbing against your shirt or something that's activating your channel most of the time. Just don't panic about it. Don't panic about it. Just information.
I'm in a very quiet place. I don't know. I don't have any background noise. That's interesting.
Michael, just put yourself in mute, like everybody else is in mute when we are not speaking. So any noise will come up. Put yourself in mute, and that will make it.
So a fascinating question that we asked, and I'm keeping my eye on time, Damien, was what are the factors that make supervision difficult? And I think this is really interesting and fruitful to think about. And I found answering that question to Tatiana made me reflect. And I do loads of reflection, but it made me reflect and think, there's something there. It was a new question for me. So, what are the factors that make supervision difficult? I'll throw it open to the virtual room, to start off with. What do people think? 1 or 2 viewpoints.
I would say lack of preparedness on the coach's part, and a tendency to drift into areas or ask the coach to supervise non-coaching issues, like they are requesting supervision on business development or supervision on personal development. They're actually outside of the coaching domain. Right.
So there's a requirement there you're thinking about all this supervision, and then you're also thinking about another level, thinking about, is this a supervision agenda?
Well, that's one of the difficulties over here in the Americas, is that it's still so little understood and definitely not yet clearly differentiated from mentor coaching. We deal with that all the time. It makes supervision very difficult without an actual experience to get across, the idea to get across.
And don't beat yourself up too much about over here. I was doing some supervision for the UK Civil Service, but they were internal coaches, so they weren't necessarily highly qualified. They had some training or qualification. And in a lot of the groups or we did group supervision and one-to-one supervision. And often when it came to the one-to-one sessions that had been scheduled, people would say, well, I haven't really got a particular client issue I want to talk about. But what I'd like to talk about in general is, and then you'd get a pattern of how do I present myself as a coach? What do I say to potential clients? How do I attract the activity? How do I attract clients to me? How do I cope with chemistry sessions? So, I think that's probably fairly universal. And of course, when it comes to casework, a lot of it is how do I do this? What is the best technique? So a lot of people are working at that level. So that just to say that's quite normal. But I think I'm interested that you're already operating in a different sphere at the same time as working within the sphere of the coach client, which I think is already a sort of level of complexity.
Peter?
Yeah.
This is Linda. And the questions that come up for me are many when we talk about what are the factors of difficulty, right? I think for me it has to do with this meta process of being with and being, well, like in the balcony, being in the balcony, as well as being in the dance, being a part of the process and yet above the process, so that you can be clearly and fully aware of keeping that safe place open for both people. I mean, it's such a process of learning and of being aware of, and I'm always going, well, what could I have done differently? What could I have done better? And yet the response from the supervisees, which I have are few, but it's been such an amazing process to be at that meta level, or to try to be at that meta level, being aware of myself and my presence, my executive presence, if you will, with them and them being with me. I mean, it's so much about trust and being able to challenge what comes up, so to speak, and answering or giving those potent questions, those really significant questions that open up the deep dive for the person or the supervisees, as well as for myself, and to still be in that open place internally, so that I can also give of myself in the idea of pushing the others in a challenging way, but in a very non-judgmental way. It's, I mean, it's not easy.
And that is also what makes it fascinating, isn't it? I think
exactly.
That's a lot of people that we've worked with on supervision specifically will say, I just love this. It's like coaching made ultimate or something. It's not everybody needs to feel like that. It's not obligatory. But I think it's that complexity. Certainly, I mean, just as you're describing, I think you've described how I experience it very clearly. So I'm sort of drawn to reading out what I said to Tatiana in response to this question. So I said, what I find difficult is handling the multi-dimensional aspect. There are so many layers we can look at. We can think about the client system, the system that is coaching practice in general, the norms and what we think coaching practice should be, the coach's own practice. We could go through all 7 eyes thinking about what each of them, what's happening in each of them. You're operating at so many different levels at once, and each of these levels is complex, and you're also managing yourself in terms of style. And am I going to be more interventionist with this problem, with this person, or am I going to be more exploratory? What function does it feel like they need most at the moment? It's like you're working in 3 or 4 different worlds, and each of them is complex and multi-layered. And you might be aware of all that complexity, and that in itself can be a distraction. So it goes on. But I think it's interesting, you've kind of captured the same feeling, I think, and put it rather elegantly. So that's really nice. I'm sorry if I'm wary now that might have closed down other people's views. Did anybody else want to say anything about what factors make supervision difficult?
So Peter, we have 3 more minutes to wrap up, because we want to leave a couple of minutes at the end for some announcements. So
sure. Okay, well, let's just round off then. And we had another question of what do we think is happening in supervision? Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. So what was interesting with these questions, that my experience of doing this work with Tatiana, which granted was for a piece of writing, was that when we came to the first question again, what do experienced coaches need to know and do over and above their knowledge and skills as coaches in order to become coaching supervisors? So what's different about it? And where we got to was actually having talked about each of those questions between us, and we had slightly different answers, though slightly similar answers as well. We came to a conclusion that people's coaching practice is quite elastic. People's supervision practice is quite elastic. The relationship between them in a particular supervision session might be quite elastic. And so, in fact, it didn't seem to make sense to us for there to be a very kind of hard and fast, so this is coaching, this is supervision. Now, we might want to articulate that for the purposes of education, or the purposes of marketing, or the purposes of research, in order to kind of fix something in the ground. And I think that's probably a research agenda more generally, but reflecting on where we are at the moment, and one of the reasons why perhaps it's very fascinating, very exciting, a very stimulating activity, but also a little bit uncertain, is that we have this elasticity, and that when we describe one person's supervision, we can't assume that somebody else's supervision is also like that. And when we work as supervisors, when we work with one person's coaching, we can't assume that another person's coaching is like that. And that's the kind of end point, I guess, that we got to through this kind of inquiry. So that's, you said 2 or 3 minutes. So I think I've used those 2 or 3 minutes, Damien, and I won't go on any longer, because everybody else has, it's the end of the day for me, but everybody else has other things that they need to be pushing on with.
Thank you, Peter. I don't know, maybe somebody had a couple of last comments before we go. I want to just share a couple of reactions that I had. First is, what we have done today here is exactly what we do in supervision. I don't know everybody else, but I was thinking a lot about these questions myself and reflecting on them. So I think that we have a great reflective opportunity today, Peter, with the questions that you share with us. So thank you for that. And the second, what you were saying is like, connecting with what you said with what Michelle said before and what Pat said before, is like for coaching supervision to be developed in the market, particularly in North America. It seems, and some people may agree with me or some people may know, that it feels that we need to have some definitions to clarify and to explain and to make it bring awareness. Like one of my goals is to bring awareness of what is coaching supervision and how it works. And it seems that sometimes to be able to do that, if we don't have good definitions or answers to some of these questions, it's more challenging to explain the value of coaching supervision. Some people may not agree with me here, but this is what I'm trying to figure out. Particularly now, we're going to this conference next week in Washington, D.C. I don't know who are coming from here. I hope get to see many people here. And one of our goals is to bring visibility to coaching supervision, a visibility that the International Coach Federation as an organization is not doing, So in some way, we are taking that space and that responsibility and bringing that awareness by providing free coaching supervision to all of the people who are going to be there who want to receive that during or after the conference. Terry put together some buttons that said, ask me about coaching supervision. So we can start the dialogue and the conversation during the conference. We have 1,500 people coming, and it's the biggest coaching conference in the world. So I think that this conversation period is very relevant for us when we get there next week to talk about these things. So I don't know if anybody have any comments or reactions before we go. And Lily, we have a couple of announcements. Anybody would like to make any comments or Terry showing there? So please, everybody who's going to be to the conference, come to our table and we will give you one so you can have one during the conference.
Damien, I'm so pleased and proud that you are bringing opportunities for coaching supervision to the conference. That's outstanding. And I hope that those that support you there are well supported as well. So good luck, and that's wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, we need to all support each other here. And this is the reason why we have this network. One of the goals of these meetings, once a month or every other month, we're meeting with Lynn and Lily. We are organizing these meetings just to create that network of support. This is what we need together. We need to help develop this together as a community. Any last comment before we go?
Just thank you to Peter for stepping in, and every bit of this we get is helpful to us as we move forward in our own growth. So just thank you.
Thank you, Pam.
Yeah. As Michelle put it so eloquently when she said, expanding the way we are looking at things. When you said that before, I thought, oh, that's so on target. So thank you, Peter, for helping us to do that today.
Well, I can go to bed happy if that's what I've been able to achieve. So thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks so much for your time, Peter.
Lily, do you want to make any announcement before we go?
Just reminder that we have a Coach Your Supervision Conference, April 19th, 20th, 2018. Peter Hawkins is going to do his 7-eyed deep dive on the 19th, and then we're going to have a supervision conference of workshops on the 20th, of which we have some speakers here. Peter's going to open it with keynote. Lori's going to do something on vulnerability, Brene Brown's work. Who else is here? Kibsey's going to be talking at the conference as well. So it'll be full of fun. So I hope you can make it. We'll send something out at some point.
And Lily, do we have a meeting? Do we have yet? We don't have confirmed our next meeting for this community meeting. Do we? Do we have a session?
Not yet. We're working on that. So it'll probably be, with imagine, end of September, beginning of October.
Okay, good. Good
And if
know.
anyone has any thoughts on speakers, send them to me or Damien or Lynn, and we'll see what we can do about lining people up. Or if you have something you'd like to bring to this community as well, because this is not about bringing others in, it's about learning together in community. So I'm sure many of you have things to discuss as well. Somebody had their hand up? No? I
have to think about it.
Yes.
Great. Great opportunity.
All right.
See you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a great week.
Thanks, Peter.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Hey, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Damien, Lily, and Peter.
Yeah.